Hello everyone, and welcome to Part 5 of A Victory Garden for Maine, brought to you by the University of Maine Cooperative Extension. I'm Becca, and with me today I have Donna, Marjorie, and Lori. Today we'll be discussing tips for managing weeds in your garden. Lori, you have our first question?
Thanks, Becca. I don't like the untidy look that weeds can give to a garden, but are there other reasons I should be concerned about them?
You can call any plant that's growing in the wrong place a weed. If undesirable plants get out of hand, they'll compete with your crops for water, sunlight, and soil nutrients. And in many situations, weeds can reduce air circulation around your crops, making them more susceptible to disease. Tall weeds can also harbor insects that feed on your garden crops.
So if I want to keep weeds from taking over my garden, what's the best strategy?
There are many things you can do. If you have a problem with a particular weed, try to identify what it is, or at least how it spreads. Does it reproduce by shedding thousands of seeds? Or does it spread by runners or underground stems? If you pull it out, does it regrow from plant fragments left behind? Does it come back every year? When you learn a plant's life cycle, you can figure out the best strategy for controlling it over the long run.
I know that plants, including weeds, can be divided into 3 categories: annuals, biennials, and perennials. How do I manage them differently?
Let's start with annuals. These sprout from seeds, they grow for a year, and then die. They typically produce many seeds that can germinate to produce more plants the following year. If you can recognize annual weeds when they're young, you can remove them before they mature and fill your garden with seeds. Take lamb's quarters, for example. When it's young, it's edible, but a mature plant can produce more than 70,000 seeds. And under the right conditions, those seeds can remain alive in the soil for decades. Other examples of common annual weeds are pigweed, ragweed, purslane, and crabgrass.
I know biennials take 2 years to produce seeds. What would be an example of a biennial weed I might find in my garden?
If you get compost from a livestock farm, you may also get burdock. In the first year, burdock grows a rosette of leaves that are near the ground. The second year, the plant will send up a flowering shoot that has all the burrs on it. Then it will die, but it will spread by shedding its seeds. It's best to dig out this type of plant early in its first year. As the burdock ages, it develops a massive taproot that is nearly impossible to remove.
So that leaves perennials. What are some perennials that I might see in the garden?
Perennials are plants that come back year after year. They can reproduce from seed or plant parts. They can be woody or herbaceous, stationary like dandelions or creeping like quackgrass. This is why when you're preparing a site for your garden, you need to remove the weeds, roots and all, before you plant. Other perennial weeds you might find in your garden are horsetail, plantain, and some thistles.
With many things in life, I find that prevention is easier than a cure. What are some of the ways that I can prevent weeds from being an issue in my garden?
Keeping weed seeds out of the garden is the first step. The top inch of soil contains a natural storage of seeds. This weed seed bank is constantly being renewed when wind blows seed in, or birds drop them, or you might bring them in on your shoes, or in plants from other places, or in mulches. Don't cultivate the soil too much because deep cultivation brings weed seeds to the surface to germinate, and too much rototilling ruins the soil structure. Also, keep a 10 to 25-foot border mowed around your garden perimeter. Whatever you do, don't let weeds go to seed in your garden. If they start to flower, at least cut off the top of the weed. If you're adding manure to your garden, use composted manure rather than fresh. It's less likely to contain weed seeds.
What if I have so many weeds in my garden that I just want to take a year off?
Great question. In that case, a great option would be to grow a cover crop like buckwheat. Buckwheat grows quickly, and it outcompetes the weeds for space and light. Some cover crops are called green manures because they provide nutrients for the crop you grow afterwards. You can sow cover crops by broadcasting seed into tilled soil like you'd scatter chicken feed. You can also plant in rows that are spaced very close together. Pull a rake over the soil to cover the seed with a 1/4 inch soil. There's no need to add fertilizer. The cover crop will become the fertilizer for your next garden. Just make sure to cut it down and incorporate it into the soil before it goes to seed, or it can become a weed itself.
Is mulch a good way to prevent weeds?
Mulch is a great option. Mulch is a protective covering that you put on the ground. It not only prevents weeds, it also insulates the soil from temperature extremes. It prevents soil from splashing up onto your plants, reducing the chance of disease. It reduces soil crusting and erosion, and organic mulches are slow-release sources of nutrients.
I've tried to use sawdust before to keep down the weeds in my garden, but my vegetable leaves turned yellow. What was going on?
A carbon-rich mulch, like sawdust, can temporarily pull nitrogen out of the soil while the soil microbes break it down. That can cause your plant leaves to turn yellow. In your vegetable garden, it's better to stick with organic mulches that aren't quite as high in carbon.
Which organic mulches are best?
Organic mulches were once living and will slowly decompose and feed soil organisms. Popular ones include shredded leaves, straw, and dried grass clippings. But never mulch with grass clippings from a lawn that's been treated with a herbicide. And avoid using hay because that brings many weed seeds into your garden. You can also buy more exotic organic mulches like buckwheat hulls or cocoa hulls. One year I mulched my flower beds with cocoa hulls, and my garden smelled like chocolate for a month. In my permanent garden pathways, I like to put down several layers of newspaper and then cover them with wood shavings. Don't use wood shavings on top of your vegetable beds, though, because, like sawdust, they will tie up nitrogen in the soil.
When is the best time to add organic mulches to the garden, and how much should I use?
Apply organic mulch in the late spring after the soil warms up. Spread about 2 inches of mulch over the soil surface around your crops, but not in direct contact with your seedlings.
What about using plastic mulches or tarps in the garden?
You have probably seen the black plastic mulch that commercial farmers use to control weeds in their field. It's a special type of plastic that will hold up to sunlight during the summer. They put it down early when the soil is moist and free of weeds. They plant their seeds or seedlings in holes that are made with a knife or butane torch. As a home gardener, you can use black plastic mulch too. But when the season is over, you have to pull up the plastic and dispose of it. Some gardeners try to get more than 1 year out of their plastic by using heavy tarps that are laid down with rocks. They pull the vegetables out of the planting holes and then the next year plant a vegetable from a different plant family to reduce disease. There are paper mulches on the market. They will decompose once they're tilled into the soil at the end of the season. A number of years ago, I tried paper mulch that came on a roll and put it down in my garden. After a rain, it looked beautiful and tight. I had 2 Labrador dogs that liked to run through the garden, and as you can guess, they ran over the paper mulch and punched it full of holes. I haven't used it since.
When I go to the garden center, I see a lot of different tools that can be used to weed the garden. Can you go over a few of the tools and how they can be used to control weeds?
Sure. We use lots of different types of tools to interrupt the weed's life cycle. For example, a dandelion puller is used for plants with tap roots. It will help you get the whole root so the plant doesn't regrow. You can use a shovel, a trowel, or a digging fork to uproot perennials. If you have the perennial weed called quackgrass, which spreads aggressively by underground stems, you'll need to tease it out gently so you don't leave any fragments behind. A scuffle hoe or stirrup hoe undercuts small weeds. If you use this when the soil is dry, you can leave the uprooted plants on the soil surface to die in the sun. If you choose to use a weed whacker, use caution around your trees or shrubs. The weed whacker can girdle a tree if you get too close.
Last year, I was not as diligent as I should have been about keeping weeds out of my garden, and a number of them went to seed. I'm worried there's tons of weed seeds waiting for me this year. Is there anything I can do?
Yes, you could use a stale seed bed method. Prepare the ground as if you're going to plant. Add your soil amendments, and if the soil is dry, water it, but don't plant your crop yet. After 5 days, go through with a scuffle hoe and disturb the soil no deeper than an inch. This will disturb any weed seeds that have sprouted. Just disrupt the soil lightly, enough to kill young seedlings, but not bring up more weed seeds. Then wait 5 days and do it again. Keep repeating this process over 2 to 4 weeks. This is an effective way to deplete the weed seed bank in the top couple inches of soil before planting your crop.
What about chemical controls for weeds?
Using a chemical to kill weeds should be your last resort. If you have identified what weed you have, tried non-chemical methods, and were not able to manage your problem weeds, there are a number of herbicides on the market, but you need to be very careful and read and follow the label directions. There are organic and synthetic herbicides. There are herbicides that are very selective in what they control, and there are herbicides that kill everything green. There are herbicides that prevent weed seeds from germinating, but they will also prevent vegetable seeds from germinating. This is why it's important to read the label before you buy one. Buy only the quantity that you need. Understand how to mix if it's a concentrate, and know the right timing to make it effective. And after you've used a herbicide, evaluate how well it controlled your weeds.
What are some resources I could use to help me identify weeds in my garden?
I suggest that you learn to identify at least 10 weeds by sight. There are many references to help, including a book that many extension offices use called Newcomb's Wildflower Guide. Another book, Weeds of the Northeast, has pictures of various stages of weeds. There are also websites that can help you identify weeds. UMass Amherst has a weed herbarium that you can access online. There's an app that you can use out in the garden that's available on Android or Apple called ID Weeds from Missouri Extension. You can also take a picture of your weed and either email it to your county extension office or use our plant identification form.
Thanks, Marjorie, Donna, and Lori. So to recap, learn to identify weeds and how they grow. Don't let annual weeds go to seed. Prepare your garden beds by removing all weeds and minimizing the number of weed seeds present. During the growing year, prevent weeds from growing by using mulch or cultivating your soil shallowly. Choke out a serious weed problem by planting a fast-growing cover crop. And finally, get yourself the proper tools to manage weeds effectively. More information is available on the University of Maine Cooperative Extension website and in the video's description. Make sure to check out our next video on how to water your garden.